One of the first times that I got in trouble, I was making fake cigarettes and selling them to kids. Everything always makes a whole lot of sense when you look at it retrospectively.
How did it feel when you walked into the parliament as a official member?
Behind closed doors where nobody sees it, you're crying and you're breaking down and life's hard and impossible, but then we go back out into the big wide world and pretend like everything's fine so that everybody else pretends like everything's fine. I was depicted in our national paper in a cartoon smoking a giant bong.
Who do you think represents the stronger evil in politics?
Oh dear, you're going to get me into geopolitical. I knew that I had joined the right political party when the day after Trump was elected. Yeah, I'm also not on TikTok. Kia ora, my name is Chlöe Swarbrick. I'm a Green Party MP and candidate for Auckland Central, and today we're talking about how everything is political.
Thank you so much for coming. Before elections, after lockdown, probably quite a hectic, crazy time. And I really appreciate that you're here. And the goal of the conversation, if we can put it this way, is I actually want to get to know you as a real human being and also politician, because I think you communicated so eloquently in your work how it's important for you to be authentic and believe in what you're doing. And to be honest, I think political world is quite a challenging place to advocate those values, but maybe I'm wrong. So
no, I think that you're definitely right. Yeah, thank you for having me, firstly. It's cool to be back at my old school. I actually did drama in this room for about 2 years. Miss Druitt, who was my teacher, we were sat in a circle in this room, and she was sat at the top and I would have been sitting just behind me. And she was making fun of, in a lovely way that only teachers can, the fact that I'd done this drama assignment and I'd used all of the isms. So, colloquialism, all of the different versions of kind of philosophizing and creating soliloquies about how drama and human beings interact and perform or whatever else. And she was one of the really kind of foundational characters in my life to get me to drop out of school and go to uni. So it's cool to be here.
Cool, another influential person in your life.
She's incredible. So I'm technically a high school dropout. So I had to sign dropout forms. And that was It was a very weird experience because I got discretionary entrance to the University of Auckland, but it wasn't really recognised by the school. So I just kind of signed this form at the reception and then just walked out and never kind of came back until after I'd become a politician, which was a very weird experience. So,
Was it a lot of judgment in the room, or like what sort of vibe was that?
It wasn't so much judgment as it was, I guess schools deal with that a lot, just kids who don't necessarily vibe or fit with the education system. And I think more than anything that it was just a process, and I was just another kid going through that process. So it's quite bizarre now to be held out as an example of somebody who's come from, a certain school when at the point in time, there wasn't all too much systematically that was backing me to become who I am. But as I said before, that's why the people who were kind of fuse breakers inside of that system, like Mrs. Druitt, were so critically important. And I've been really fortunate it's not just teachers. I mean, they've typically taken the role of being teachers in my life, I guess. But I've got a lot of incredible women who have held me up in a lot of different ways and taught me a lot of things or supported me in a lot of different ways, including in, the Greens. And that's been one of the biggest opportunities and just differential factors, I think, for me. Nobody ever does any of this stuff alone. It may look like they do, but they don't.
I also know that one of your other influential people in your life is your father.
Yeah.
And I want to go back a little bit to your childhood. Describe yourself as little Chlöe and how different that girl is from the girl that sits next to me.
So I think there's a lot of different versions of my younger self. Growing up, my parents, so my adoptive father is the guy who I call my dad. My biological father at that point in time lived in London, but I didn't know about him until I was 13. So I was adopted, became Chlöe Swarbrick when I was about 3. That's when my mum and dad got married. Then my little sister was born, and then things kind of started to fray around the marriage. Mum and dad split up. My mum took me and my little sister Grace to London. And dad at that point in time moved to Papua New Guinea. And then mum realised just how challenging it was to raise 2 small children alone in London. Dad offered to take me and my little sister. So we went from London to Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. And then we lived there. My grandma came over to look after us for about 1.5 years. So I had my 7th birthday in Port Moresby. And then we moved back. So between the ages of about 5 and 7, there was a lot of movement. And then when I came back, I was at 1 primary school, which is quite different because I went to about 6 primary schools before that. And that's when I guess I first started. I have memories that I can really reflect on. So my dad, I mean, one of the things that I first got in trouble for actually, so my dad was a chain smoker. He's now no longer smoking tobacco because of harm cessation, so he's on vapes. But he's very much addicted to nicotine. And when I was younger, you know, it was a process of the laws being changed. So first you weren't allowed to smoke in bars, and then it got, you know, cut off to you're not allowed to smoke just outside the street in the cafes, and there were smoke-free areas and all these other things. But I remember being really fascinated by my dad's cigarettes. And one of the first times that I got in trouble was in my first year back at school at Hillsborough Primary School, when I was making fake cigarettes and selling them to kids for 10 cents.
That's where your entrepreneurial
Well, there you go. And, you know, I just had seen what Dad's cigarettes look like. They had, you know, tobacco inside of it that was kind of shredded. So I just got pieces of paper, shredded that up, coloured in the edges, and then just, you know, and I got in trouble.
Did you try to smoke it yourself before selling to the
I knew it wasn't supposed to be smoked, but, you know, I knew as well the power of symbolism, I guess, at that point in my life. So, I did that for about 2 days, and then I got in trouble.
Do you enjoy this interview? Then subscribe to our YouTube channel now. Express yourself, put like or dislike, and make sure to leave a comment. So now I understand that your personality was thriving because of your dad's influence and some amazing people that you met in your life that reinforced your views that actually everything is possible and you don't really need to follow the system or certain rules that someone told you or wrote in the book, and you just follow. So you kind of discover your own way. Which is cool because it's really inspiring, I think, for young people. Even I'm slightly older than you, but I'm like, how did she do it? Like, how did she go just then? Like, at the 17, you went to study law, then you did arts and philosophy, which are major, awesome subjects, to study systems, again, something that you're trying to recreate or reshape. Then you had a few businesses and very diverse things running with your ex-partner and doing journalism, and everything like this can be packaged in 4 or 5 years, maybe 6. Sorry if I'm wrong in chronological order, but it's still quite intense time. So first question is like, how did you is it a part of your nature? How do you deal with letting things go and starting something new quite easily? It looks easy, but is it so?
I think probably the first thing to note is that everything always makes a whole lot of sense when you look at it retrospectively. When you're in the thick of it, it's not. So I think I am really cautious of being held out as a role model in this respect, because it was incredibly tense and intense, and very much, I think, driven by elements, to be perfectly honest with you, of self-loathing and trying to prove that I meant something to the world and provide value. So some of it wasn't particularly healthy, probably, working to the point of literal collapse. You know, I ignored stomach pain.
Yeah, was it, in what part of your life was it?
Oh, pretty much that whole time. You know, I think that we have a big problem in celebrating people working themselves to death. So don't get me wrong, there were some incredible moments and some incredible times in those several years, but there also was a deeply unhealthy focus on productivity and carrying everything on your shoulders.
Can sense that. Like, seriously, my inner neurotic was like, I don't know how it's possible. Yeah. Well, like, I felt for you in that. Like, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. Am I imagining in that? Because you're not a machine.
No, nobody is. And again, that's why I really feel like we need to push back. I think particularly on the archetypes of, you know, the superwoman, the mother who has a baby and then works 80 hours a week and all of these other things. They're unsustainable.
Domestic stuff as well.
It's unsustainable. It's championed because it enables, you know, everything to keep humming along at a high level, systematic way of doing things. And individuals feel like they have to pretend and they have to hold up this notion of, no, I'm perfect, everything's fine, I'm good. And then go home and behind closed doors where nobody sees it, you're crying and you're breaking down and life's hard and impossible. But then we go back out into the big wide world and pretend like everything's fine so that everybody else pretends like everything's fine.
Exactly.
So that
and because no one speaks about it.
Yep.
It creates that culture of silence when you just pretend.
Exactly.
And how do you do with rest these days?
I'm trying.
I mean, if we're not talking about pre-election stuff, because I think it's slightly different from the normal.
Well, funnily enough, it's pretty similar, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, 2017, the election was very full on, but I think this COVID election is slightly different. There's a huge amount of work to do with helping people who are struggling right now, particularly I think because of the privilege of my position. So, you know, I have the opportunity to lobby or to raise issues in the public, in the media, to try and force other politicians' hands to do things. But in terms of rest broadly, I do a lot better now than I did in my first year in Parliament, because I think I recognise that I would just not be able to survive if I didn't. You know, when you are extremely busy, the first thing to go is exercise, diet, and sleep. And those three things are kind of like the holy trifecta to remain healthy. And without them, you're on a hiding to nowhere, basically. So I've attempted to actively reposition them in my day-to-day kind of schedule. But I do find it very difficult to relax. And I think that, again, is a kind of hangover from a few years, well, my whole adult life of defining myself by my work. So I'm actively working on it, and I never want to be held out as the best example of how to do these things. So,
totally. And it's it takes time to develop your own way of looking after yourself. And again, I don't think there is a
perfect
sleep, exercise, diet. Yes, I mean, sleep is crucial for me, but also sometimes if you're stressed out, you can't even fall asleep. So what do you do, right? Not to get to that point of your life.
Totally.
Do you attend any parties or events at all?
I mean, I hang out with my friends, which is something that I didn't really allow myself the same kind of level of time for years before. You know, nowadays I'm obviously very cautious of the reality that going to larger scale events means more eyes. So, you know, you have to, and this is probably the weirdest thing about being a politician, there is walking in two worlds. I'm pretty much exactly the same person in both of those spaces, but there is definitely, when you're aware that people are watching you, there is an element of being on more than you otherwise would be.
It can also contribute to the inability to rest.
Yeah,
right.
Massively.
Yeah.
But I have dinner. I had dinner with some friends last night, which was lovely, and yeah, just those people who were actually largely my friends prior to becoming a politician. So I've got a lot of mates who are artists and musicians and creatives, and a lot of people who don't have a lot of money.
But super creative.
Yeah, but I find...
And this is another injustice that we need to fight,
massively,
Chlöe, right?
Massively. I mean, for me, that was the major reason that I tipped over into being involved in politics. It was the closure of the King's Arms, which is a local music venue, but it was also just recognising that the people who end up producing things which end up being commodified and then gentrified and then sold at the highest possible value are the people that are amongst those least valued in society. So kind of the valuing of creativity is really key to me.
Yeah, it's very key to me. I'm also a creative entrepreneur. So know the pain, know the pain and know the joy. Because you can't know the joy without the pain.
Exactly. It's right? Two sides.
We're getting there. We're getting to the political side of things. I actually wanted to know, how did it feel when you walked into the parliament as a official member? And what was the first day like?
Oh God, I couldn't remember the first day. No. I mean, the funny thing about being elected is that that's not confirmed for another 2 weeks when the final results come in. So technically, I was elected on September 23rd, 2017, but that wasn't confirmed until kind of October. A lot of people nowadays ask me, what was it like to be, the youngest one? I can't tell you because I don't have anybody else's perspective. I can only tell you what it was like to be me, and I guess I can reflect on how I was treated in relation to others. And I can definitely tell you that if you do not fit the stereotype of what a politician is supposed to be, then...
What is the stereotype?
A dude in a suit.
Yeah.
Then you are held to a higher standard. You're held to a higher standard. You have to prove, legitimize and validate yourself in a way that others don't.
I'm really interested who inspires you in politics at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it is just important to clarify that on the inspirational front, it's not just the people it's
the policies.
It is the policies. Like inspiration, I very strongly believe is a mirror. If you are inspired by somebody, then you're seeing something reflected back in yourself that you admire about yourself, and that's something that you should lean into, and it therefore is a shared attribute.
I agree.
So who inspires me on an international stage? I mean, Mairi Black, she's a SNP, Scottish National Party, I believe it is, Member of Parliament, in Westminster. I met her when I was in the UK about 2 years ago. She's just so eloquent in articulating the things that she believes. And I mean, that's one of probably the more obvious roles of politicians is if you want to change something, you have to be compelling and bring people on board with your argument. And she does that in a phenomenal way. But she also really does the work and is a fighter in that respect. My friend as well, Jordan Steele-John, who is in Australia the youngest senator. He's a Green as well. He is based out of Perth, but obviously, gets to Canberra for the Senate. And the funniest thing about myself, Mairi, and Jordan is that we're all the same age. So we're all born in 1994. I'm not sure what was in the water in 1994, but that's cool.
Green water.
Yeah, wow.
The water was green.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of all of them. I mean, if you look at folks who have been doing things internationally, I mean, of course, there's people like Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, those who are unapologetically themselves and staunch in what they believe in and not kowtowing.
Actually, I wanted to ask, who do you think represents the stronger evil in politics? Putin or Trump?
Oh dear, you're going to get me into geopolitical dramas.
I'm just curious what sort of relation the local politician here should have towards
so I very strongly stand against authoritarian regimes. I, as a queer person in a same-sex relationship, I very strongly stand in solidarity with the people who are currently protesting against Putin's regime. There are immense abuses of human rights currently occurring. So then on the Trump side of things, I knew that I had joined the right political party when the day after Trump was elected, which was before I, was elected to the Greens. So he was elected obviously in 2016 and I had joined the Greens. This was after he was ordained or whatever the process is where he's officially kind of doing the speech. There was a motion in Parliament at that point in time to send congratulations to Trump. And the Greens in Parliament stood up and said, we're not going to send congratulations to somebody who has divided a nation, engaged in dog whistling and polarising politics and endangered people through racism and xenophobia and homophobia and a raft of other things that we do not believe should exist in an evolved humanitarian country. So
you can't choose between those two?
Well, I think that they're both also products of the system that they are part of. So I think that, if you think about, I was also in Vienna when, at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, when I can't remember which of the Russian ministers came forward, but I'm very actively involved in drug law reform and approaching that from a humanitarian perspective and an evidence-based perspective as well, because you can talk all you like about how we want to treat people compassionately and everything else, but also if you want to put those values to the side, also doing things from a very criminal, punitive, penalisation frame of mind just doesn't work. So there's the evidence base as well. And, internationally there was some attempts by Russian diplomats to invoke some pretty awful things towards people who are addicted to substances, like greater criminal punishment and all of these other things. So again, I think that is, and, the United States in that framework wasn't engaged in that same way because foreign policy is slightly different and obviously it's somewhat detached from the regime of the day. So I think that, I don't know either of them personally. I think that they both are not great forces for the world.
I don't think anyone knows them personally.
Yeah, this is true.
They know themselves personally.
Yeah, true.
But we have a joke that, Putin is actually not real guy at the moment because something wrong happens to his face. There are lots of conspiracy theories around Putin as phenomenon.
I'll also say that, when they were here, I hosted a chat with Pussy Riot. So I'm very much of that side of politics. Yeah, I very much do not believe in authoritarian regimes that, violently quell dissent.
Yeah, it's funny that we still continue to choose those regimes.
I don't know if we actively choose them because this is a structural thing as well, right? And if they're able to continue to influence society and culture. And I think, look at, for example, the United States and the two-party system and the electoral college system as well, where, and don't get me wrong, there's so many flaws with both of the candidates, but I also think that, to actively choose or to decide that racism, homophobia, sexism, active celebration of abuse is not a deal breaker for voting for somebody like Trump, then you are tacitly endorsing it. But yeah, like there are so many systematic flaws with the way that those elections are undertaken. And they also, you know, particularly if you were to talk about Russian elections, for example, international human rights bodies have some challenges with the way that those are undertaken too.
Oh, totally. Don't get me started.
So this is a little dachshund or sausage dog, which is my favorite kind of dog, given to me by my friend Deborah Smith, who regularly, for some reason, gives me little model animals. But I have decided to gift this to the show to the person who can best answer the question in a creative manner, in a collaborative manner, however you decide to come up with the brief yourself. But how are we going to get more people actively engaged in democracy? In a nutshell, how are we going to get more people voting?
Leave your comment under this YouTube video and we'll get in touch with the lucky winner. Apart from working into the systematic change and trying to make Auckland a better place as well to live, was to engage youth, young people.
Was to engage all people, actually. But
all
youth,
people.
I think because I'm young.
I'm not going there,
yeah.
Don't worry. I actually think you're doing an amazing job and being really brave. But yeah, all people. But do you think if we're talking about youth and engaging youth into elections and actually voting and showing what their interests are or what their public opinion is, do you think this cannabis legislation referendum helps to engage them? Is it their kind of...
I don't know.
Because you've done a lot of public talks and Facebook Lives, explaining what it is.
Yeah, the main reason for that is because nobody else in the political realm is willing to put themselves behind something which is controversial and therefore risky. Are you serious? Oh yeah. No, there's a reason that...
But there is also a cool reason, because you'll be talked about, and that's what politics is all about sometimes.
Nah, well, not when... I mean, I don't know if people remember what it was like when I first started talking about cannabis law reform. 3 years ago, when it first started happening, I was depicted in our national paper in a cartoon smoking a giant bong. Like, I have been ridiculed. I have been, like...
Look at you now. You're doing the same thing. Exactly.
I mean, but this is the thing, right? There is a very active pushback against any form of social change, and that is, you know, the basis of conservatism, is that to learn and to challenge ourselves and to evolve when systems aren't working. But a lot of people are very comfortable with the way that things are, and
majority of the people.
Majority of the people who engage in the system, and that's the problem, is that the people who have the most to gain by voting are the least likely to vote. Like, so many young people who are also overrepresented in mental ill health statistics are just struggling and stressed to survive. So whilst the cannabis referendum is something that may excite a few, I think that it can be quite difficult to get charged up and interested in it if you're just fighting to survive. And I think a disproportionate number of young people are. So I think it's one component of making for an exciting election. The other elements of an exciting election have to be a movement for people to believe in. And I guess cannabis law reform can be one opening to that, but it has to have a far broader platform of quality housing, of good jobs, of a society that's compassionate and cares for each other, of climate action. So, you know, I guess I can walk and chew gum. We can talk about the issue of cannabis law reform and all of those other things. Yep. But cannabis law reform in isolation is probably not going to drag everybody out to the polling booths, because if they want cannabis, they can already get it. It's just a matter of whether other people are criminalised, which is a criminal justice issue, which requires a bit more cerebral power.
Totally. I remember you said an actually interesting thing about that baby boomer, because of course you're also famous for, okay, boomer, okay, Chlöe documentary. Baby boomer generation was growing up, or they had their youth when there was free love and cannabis available, and they are the ones who are against the law. So it's quite a fun paradox. Not fun, but interesting fact. And I was thinking also, taking my perspective, okay, I'm growing up in the technological, social media, overused, informational pandemic time. And if I am politics, for example, because I'm 33, so when I'm 50, I would be really trying to regulate the use of social media and tell how young people need to live. So always thinking of the consequences of one another. But I wonder, in a wild perspective, do you think social media or how we use social media should be regulated at all? Because it has implications on mental health.
Yeah. I think,
you know, if drugs are allowed, like all kind of things, as you said, you can't look at one thing in separation from another.
So I think that perhaps policing it from the position of a consumer is the wrong way to look at it. I'd far rather look at it from regulating the producers of it. Because right now, these multinational corporations are making a huge amount of money by producing platforms that are intended to capture people, to drive them down very neurotic kind of obsession with these platforms. And they actively are utilizing psychological research to figure out how to do so.
Yep.
But they are also entertaining some very dangerous and dark forces.
And the amount of platforms that is growing, that's another thing, right? So it's not, TikTok is now popular and I'm not even on it.
Yeah.
Missing out.
Yeah.
And we did our
I'm also not on TikTok, but you know, the like all of this stuff comes down to users being commodified. So people who are using these aren't the users, they are the product. And they are being sold to by corporations who purchase into
That's
these
scary.
platforms.
That's like against our human rights.
Well, to a certain extent.
But we do sell it.
Yeah.
We don't even, lots of people don't understand it.
No, no one's reading it. Yeah.
That's the scary part.
But I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? We're using any of the technologies that we do, even though we can pay exorbitant amounts for like an iPhone, for example, that was produced with a huge amount of exploitation of both people and the planet. When you read through the terms and conditions to start that iPhone up, you are signing away a substantive amount of privacy anyway. So it's quite bizarre that we have enabled and accepted self-regulation for a lot of these platforms. They're just, you know, deciding what they themselves think is adequate regulation, because it's been an area that has evolved, developed and disrupted so quickly compared to typical legislative and regulatory speed.
Totally. Went over control.
Well, yeah, it's just a matter of...
Or someone else is controlling it. So on top of it, you know.
Yeah.
Tell us about your Wabi-Sabi project. What is your Wabi-Sabi project?
So,
what is your Wabi-Sabi object? I'm losing my...
No, you're great. You're great. So here on my right, this is my notebook. It's just a moleskin notebook. I go through one of these every 3 months or so. And basically this, when I discovered how I learnt, which was writing things down, it completely changed my life. So
What do you mean? So you didn't know this before?
No. So it took me to when I was in law school. And everybody had MacBooks because they came from wealthy families. I'm the first person in my family to go to university, and I couldn't afford a laptop, so I got a notebook and I would write everything out. And I now have early onset RSI, so I've got really bad kind of, you know, veins and joints and stuff in there. But for me, writing things down and exploring ideas has been a massive game changer for me. So yeah, one of the most important things in my life is my notebook.
The last question to wrap up the conversation. What does the true leadership mean to you?
True leadership to me is not self-centering. True leadership to me is putting values ahead of your own self-progression. And to give you a really tangible example, I think that we have a very perverse incentive structure inside of our parliament right now, where in a very broad brushstroke, you effectively on a daily basis have to choose between the binaries of do you want change or do you want a career? What I mean by that is, talk about issues like cannabis, for example. I know that a huge majority of parliamentarians believe very strongly in the legalization of cannabis, but they are not choosing that change and being vocal about that because they are enamored by or controlled by or have decided to kowtow to the hierarchy of their party. So they're choosing their career. They're keeping their head down and choosing that. And by doing so, some politicians end up justifying or rationalizing that if they're there, then they can progress incremental change. They just have to be there to do that. The thing that drives me wild about that as a way of looking at the world is that it is so selfish. You are not putting change first, you're putting yourself first. So I think that true leadership is about backing the things that you know are right, even if it means that you aren't necessarily there to progress them.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To more leadership like that.